Welcome, everyone. We're pleased to have you here for the fifth and final session of Ready, Set, Grant. We'll just give it a minute for people to join the waiting room, and from the waiting room, we'll go ahead and get started. We have with us today some special guests who I will introduce in a little bit, but first I want to make sure we get this session rolling in our usual fashion. First of all, as we've mentioned in previous sessions, tremendous thanks to the Ford Family Foundation and Sherwood Trust for their generous support of this training. We'll be fortunate to hear from them a little bit later in the session. A couple of reminders because we have a panel today about Zoom etiquette. Just remember to please keep muted when not speaking so that everybody can hear the speakers. While they're making their presentations, we're going to save the Q&A until the end of their presentations. Sorry, I was just tripping over my words there. We're asking you to use the chat feature for your questions and comments so we can manage that and pull those questions in at the end. And then the other thing that's maybe a little different for today is up in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, there's an option to select speaker view. And I will take the slide deck down, and you may find that that is helpful so that you can see exactly who is speaking on a little bit bigger on your screen. For the benefit of our guests today, just to give you an idea of who we've had participating in this program over the last 5 sessions, we have people from 42 communities, 26 counties, and 4 states. And we have different nonprofits and local government agencies representing sectors from health and education to economic development and social and senior services. So what we'd like to do at the start, so that our panelists can get acquainted with some of our participants a little bit better, is we have some who are going to present the project that they've been working on during these 5 sessions to give you an idea of the kinds of projects we've been discussing. I also would like to invite others to introduce themselves in the chat as they wish. So I'm going to take the slide deck down so we can see a little bit better. So Michael, would you like to start and give a short statement of what your organization is and what project you're working on?
Good morning, I'm Michael Clues. I'm with Weiss Resource Conservation Development based out of the Dalles and Dufur. We work on essentially in the energy sector, working with different farms on energy efficient irrigation technologies. So saving folks money, water, and energy in the process. And from a project standpoint, Weiss is seeking funding for the creation of a demonstration farm to bring innovative energy and irrigation technologies to rural Oregon communities.
That's great. Thanks, Michael.
Thank you.
And May, would you like to go next? Is May here? Nope, I don't see her. How about Rachel? I see Rachel.
Hi, good morning. I'm Rachel Huser. I'm the Executive Director of the Oregon Aviation Historical Society. We're Oregon's only organization dedicated to preserving our state's rich aviation history. And currently we're fundraising to improve our exhibits, especially our portable exhibits. So that would allow us to network in other parts of the state and present at schools, museums, and also have rotating displays at different airports and locations around the state.
Great, thanks, Rachel. Next on my list, I have Leslie.
Hi, I'm Leslie with CASA of Linn County in Oregon. CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. We're the only organization in Linn County that trains and supports volunteers to advocate for abused and neglected youth who are part of the child welfare system, often called foster care. And what makes our special is in an overburdened kind of child welfare system, our advocates report directly to the court. They only have 1 to 2 cases, allowing them to kind of effectively advocate for what's in the best interest of that foster youth, with a goal of always finding a permanency for that child. And our project is always centered around our trainings and development and recruitment of our volunteers. All of our funding goes towards supporting those volunteers doing that work.
Makes sense. Thanks, Leslie. Connie.
Good morning. I am writing, I'm Connie Barkley, and I'm writing a grant for the Silverton Senior Center in rural Marion County to reopen our thrift store. This will increase our budget for programs serving senior citizens, not just in Silverton, but in the many outlying rural communities that surround us. In addition, it will provide high quality shopping for low income families, and we provide job training for high schoolers, the handicapped, and the homeless that are in our area.
Wonderful. Thank you, Connie. And next we have Christine. I don't immediately see Christine. We'll see if she comes later. And then what about, is Audrey here?
Yeah, I'm here. So my name is Audrey McLean, and I'm part of the Sheridan Family Cooperative in Sheridan, Oregon. We're kind of just starting because we had some great opportunities come up. So our small town really lacks community spaces, particularly child-friendly spaces. So our local charter school closed, and our group of families just approached the landlord and the nonprofit board that holds the building. And we've just been meeting in their empty space weekly since the beginning of the year with our preschool age kids to support each other and provide educational and social opportunities for our kids. And we're working on expanding our early childhood space with help from volunteer experts to increase capacity, attract more members, and provide a more informal gathering space in addition to our scheduled preschool group. And our landlord has agreed to donate the rent to us, and the charter school nonprofit is excited to shift their mission to support our new ideas and projects. So we're in the process of evaluating what other educational and community building services we want to offer in our space.
Great. Thanks, Audrey. It's always inspiring to hear all of the good projects that you're working on. We have a few more minutes if there's anyone else in the virtual room that wants to come off mute and introduce themselves or their organization and or their project. Is there anybody else? Go ahead, Jerome.
Sorry, I'm in a shared office space and was waving to a coworker coming into the room, not asking to stay there.
Fair enough. Chimay? Chimay, my apologies.
Yeah. Yes, my name is Chimay Tam. I am the president of the Umpqua Valley Rainbow Collective here in Douglas County, Oregon. We are a LGBTQ-led organization providing education, events, activities, and resources for LGBTQIA2S+ community here in Douglas County. So we are first groups, game night, potluck. We're actually organizing a Douglas County Pride Festival and Parade this year. And starting tomorrow, we'll be launching our LGBTQIA2S+ community needs assessment that we will be running in the next 5 to 6 months to essentially capture all the needs and concerns of our community here. And so, yeah, that's pretty much my 30-second pitch.
That's great. I appreciate it. Anybody else? Anybody else waving for real? Kitman.
My name is Kitman Kinzel, and I represent the Grant County Child Care Committee in Grant County, Oregon. And we are working to improve access to high quality, affordable, and equitable childcare in our county. And we're doing that through increasing childcare spaces, so like increasing the amount of spots we have available, as well as supporting all of the local childcares that already exist and are already established and very valuable in our community.
Nice to hear from you. Thank you. Kayla.
Hi, I'm Kayla, and I'm, excuse me, with Tater Tots Pediatric Therapy in Klamath Falls, Oregon. Our executive director, Kylan, has been on the other Zoom meetings, but wasn't available today. So this is my first one. But what we focus on is pediatric speech and physical therapy services here in Klamath County. And we also are expanding out into more community supports for families and kids outside of those that we serve through our therapy services. And that's where we're really hoping to grow as we continue to get older as an organization. So last year we were able to put on an inclusive bike camp that taught anyone ages 5 and up to ride a 2-wheeled bike. We'll be repeating that program again this year. It was great. We have some parent education and support groups coming up, hopefully starting in the later 2 quarters of this year. So just new parent support group and parents with children who have disabilities. And then a gaming social skills club to get preteens and teenagers back into interacting with each other in person rather than all this virtual life that we've all been living over the past couple of years. And then another, hopefully this year, goal is an inclusive sports league. So anybody who wants to be able to try out some different sports and different activities, but might not be able to have access to that through their regular school program or other community programs for a variety of reasons.
Great. Thanks, Kayla. Had a moment where I'm like, can I take social skills class? That's just an editorial comment. Faith, go ahead.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Faith Wilkins, founding board member and controller of Chiloquin Visions in Progress in Chiloquin, Oregon, Southern Oregon. We have a lot of projects that completed and some that are working towards completion. We put solar on our Chiloquin Community Center, which my organization built and manages, which is a huge thing for our community. We have a EV charging station that's in the works. We have some after school programs that are on hiatus. Unfortunately, COVID really hit us hard there and we haven't been able to recover that. I just want to tell you guys how appreciative I am of these 5 sessions. For me, unfortunately, the most nitty-grittiest part of life is intruded today, and I have to have my septic pumped. So, I may have to I may have to leave, and hopefully I can get back in before. But I'm here now until he comes. So, we have a big challenge in our community. We have a lot of poverty. We have an Oregon Main Street grant that was awarded to us, and we are renovating the Hervey building, a historic building in downtown Chiloquin, and trying to get some small offices and maybe in the future a restaurant and some other stores in the front part of it.
That sounds great.
Yeah, so that's it.
All right. Well, thanks for all of those. I appreciate you bringing your projects into the room so that our presenters can get an idea of who they're speaking to. So next thing I would like to do is introduce our cool panelists. First, we have Jennifer Allen from the James F. and Marion L. Miller Foundation. Jennifer joined the foundation after 25 years working with arts and education nonprofits, including positions with Friends of Multnomah County Library, Oregon Humanities, the Food Alliance, EcoTrust, and Right Around Portland. With roots in and a passion for rural Oregon, go rural, Jennifer brings skills in evaluation, facilitation, and community engagement to her role as a program officer and learning and community engagement director for the foundation. When she's not working, she likes to spend time reading, singing, and exploring the outdoors with her family. Next, we have Brian Hunt. Brian is the CEO of Sherwood Trust, which is a private place-based foundation in Walla Walla, Washington. He's a former community publisher, and his interests include equity, civic engagement, and ground-up community building. Sherwood Trust serves rural communities in Southeast Washington and Northeast Oregon with targeted grant making and nonprofit learning that supports its vision that everyone has a sense of belonging and can contribute to a thriving region. And then finally, we have Levi Williams. He leads the Ford Family Foundation's open grants programs, including the Tech Good Neighbor grants and the technical assistance grants, which are designed to respond to emerging interests and needs in rural Oregon and Siskiyou County, California. Through Levi's leadership, the foundation is equipped to guide rural nonprofits through the granting process. This is my favorite sentence in his bio. He says, "No grant is too small for a helping hand from Levi." I love that. The foundation's open grants meet rural communities where they are, provide the right level of support to fit their needs. He's spent most of his life in rural communities, some with a population under 150, that counts as rural, and has directed camps providing youth with healthy options and personal growth experience. He holds a degree in education from Olivet Nazarene University and worked in youth development for more than a decade before joining the Ford Family Foundation. So what I'm going to do now, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to stop sharing so we can see each other a little better. Each one of these panelists is going to do a short presentation to sort of explain a little bit more about what their foundation does and how to and how their grant processes work. And as they're talking, keep track of your questions, and you can either write them down or you can put them in the chat. And then after all three presentations are finished, we will open it up for Q&A. I do have a few questions to get things rolling if we find ourselves in that position, but I welcome whatever questions the group has. I'm excited to get started. So let's see who's first on my screen here. It looks like Brian. Brian, would you mind being the first to go?
I'm happy to once I find my button. Good morning, and really thank you for that exchange of all the awesome work you're doing in your communities. My heart is in rural, and I know how hard this is, and I'm just really, it's always so inspiring to hear people solving problems for themselves in the communities they're in. Sherwood Trust is, as Jennifer said, we're a relatively small place-based foundation based in Walla Walla, Washington. Our coverage area is Columbia and Walla Walla counties in Washington, and then Milton Freewater in Oregon, not the whole county. This is a historical thing that we call the Walla Walla Valley, that if you look up in geography, you'll find it's actually not the Walla Walla Valley, but that's our little core. We were founded in 1991 by Virginia and Donald Sherwood, who were local entrepreneurs in Walla Walla who died without any heirs and left money for Sherwood Trust to do good work. Since 1991, we've granted out about $36 million in our area, and we have about $30 million in, I love this word, the corpus. So that's what we work with every year. Our grants generally this year will be about $1.5 million a year. That's sort of waivers a little bit, but it's generally in that range. As Jennifer said, our specialty is place. So we're really interested in a very broad range of grant opportunities where we live. We are one of the fewer foundations that I know of that does capital grants. So we have put 88 bathrooms in, we have supported daycare creation, those kinds of things which are tricky. We have a lot of expertise in that. For that. And outside of grant making, I want to make sure that the other thing that we do is we do community learning programming. So we spend a fair amount of time, and my coworker, Julie, leads this effort to do a fair amount of community learning, which includes RDI's leadership program. And I'll brag on both of us a little, Jennifer. I think we have the longest running rural community leadership program that we have ever heard of in Walla Walla, and we're in about our 20th year. And I literally hear about it from someone who graduated from that program every single day. It's awesome.
That's great.
So Sherwood Trust's vision is that everyone in the Walla Walla Valley has a sense of belonging and contributes to a thriving region. And Sherwood Trust serves as a catalyst for building capacity, creating a cohesive, vibrant community. Our core values, which are very, very important in the way we evaluate grants, is collaboration, empathy, equity, excellence, integrity, and sustainability. A couple of things that we feel make us a little bit unique in the foundation sphere is we believe that grants are a strategic investment, and we do not consider ourselves a charity. What that really means for the most part is that we're a grant organization that's really interested in how problems are getting solved. Not just on why problems need solved. We'll meet you that they need solved. We're really interested in the models of how these things successfully get solved. So we end up with lots of questions, discussions around financials, around strategic plans. I don't see this in any way intimidating. It shouldn't be intimidating. And if it is, we're doing it wrong. But we're really interested in the model going forward. We have 2 competitive grant programs. We're deep in our biggest grant program, which is what we call the core grants. That's usually about $800,000 a year. These are competitive, and we are right now in the process of evaluating and setting up site visits for that process. We have a smaller grant program in the fall we call impact grants. This gives us ability to experiment a little. This year, the grants will only be available to organizations we have not funded in the last 5 years. That's part of our equity work to make sure that we are reaching new folks and building new relationships. Okay. So we talked about that, strategic investments, talked about core values for that. So I will sort of stop, and I know that there are a lot more people in Oregon on the call, and I know that the Ford family and Miller serve that more exclusively. So I'd be super interested in your conversations. What I'll leave you with is our strength is that we are place-based, and for us that really means hands-on and relationships. So you hear about trust-based philanthropy. We feel like we've been doing that for a long time for that. So in every opportunity we have to meet people and learn what they're doing and share how we might help, we do. So if you're in our territory, and you're interested, please reach out to me. Yeah, we love these conversations, and relationships aren't always the quickest thing, but it's really the best way to do work when we can really partner. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thanks, Brian. That's tremendous overview of your organization. I appreciate you sharing, particularly the philosophy about trust-based philanthropy. That's probably something we haven't talked about yet in these sessions, so that's helpful. Next on my screen, I have Jennifer. Jennifer, would you like to talk about your foundation next?
Sure, happy to do that. Good morning, everyone. Thanks to Freya and Jennifer for the invitation, and to all of you for having me as a part of this meeting this morning. I'll tell you a little bit about the Miller Foundation and who and what we fund and when, and then happy to answer any questions, of course, as part of the Q&A. The Miller Foundation has been around about 20 years. It's a private foundation. Mr. Miller grew up in Portland. He and his wife eventually moved to New York, but came back to Portland late in life. And he left his money, or rather they left their money, to support Oregon communities. They were really committed to education and the arts. Mr. Miller had to drop out of school in 8th grade because he needed to make money and support his family. And so he always really wanted to help kids and families get their kids all the way, at least through high school, if not beyond. The Miller Foundation has evolved over time. We've been around 20 years. We started out funding a lot of capital. So the Miller name is on buildings around the state. We don't fund capital anymore. Our huge focus is operating support. So staff, lights, rent, whatever your basic needs are. We have invested about $200 million in Oregon over the 20 years. And we have about 200 million in our corpus, and we contribute to communities about 10 million a year, 5 million in the arts and 5 million in K-12 education. I'm going to talk a lot about our arts and K-12 education funding, but I also want to mention, just because of a couple of things I heard from all of your work, we fund early childhood by invitation only. We have a really big initiative with an organization called the Children's Institute that's working statewide to create opportunities to link kindergarten and pre-K work. And they do a lot of advocacy around early childhood. So I just wanted to mention that as an aside, because it is a big part of our investment each year. So like Brian and the Sherwood Trust, we operate in a very trust-based way. We know that you know what your community needs, so we aren't really in the business of evaluating if you're taking the right approach. We determine if your work is important to the community by your participants, your partners. If you're an arts organization, do you have audiences? And if that's the case, then we want to support your work. We also are known for our simple process of application. That's something we've worked on especially hard the last few years. So we try to make it quick and easy to ask us for money, and then we try to give you an answer as quickly as we can. We also work really hard to not have you apply if you're not a fit, because we know many of you have either really limited time for grant writing or you're using volunteers to do your grant writing. So we try to be really clear in our communications. I will encourage you all to visit our website. I'm going to post the link. It's a pretty, we just redid it. So it's really up to date. It's got all the information. Oh, there it is. It's already up there. Thank you. Anyway, I just encourage you to take a look at it for all sort of the nitty-gritty details. I won't get into that today. What I'll say is here's who we fund. We fund arts organizations, K-12 education organizations, so typically 501c3s. If you're on the new side, you can apply through a fiscal sponsor. Typically, we want you to have been providing services to the community for about 3 years minimum. We also fund some schools. Typically, if it's a private school, it should be tuition free. We fund tribal governments, municipalities. We don't get very many applications from cities, towns, or the tribes, and we would like to change that. So we're trying to, part of the reason I'm here, I know, and I looked at the participant list and saw quite a few municipalities there, and I know you do have arts and education efforts. We have two main processes by which you can apply. We have our fast track program. That's for organizations with budgets between $25,000 and $500,000 a year. That's for arts or K-12 arts education organizations only. And you can apply for that anytime. You hear back from us within a few weeks. The application should take you 30 minutes to an hour, depending on how many grants you've written. I will say, if you write a grant for us, please feel free to copy and paste from other grant applications you've written. We want to make it easy to do that. I think lots of foundations are shifting to that idea as well. If your organization focuses on K-12 education, or you're an arts organization with a budget over 500,000, there aren't too many of those in our state, you apply through our two-step standard process. That's 3 times a year. You can apply for that. All the dates are on our website. Next application window is in June. What else would I want to tell you? Most of our funding, as I think I mentioned, is operating support. If there's a very unique project, say it's a merger of multiple organizations or some sort of collaborative effort, you could come in for a project grant, but otherwise it's just all operating support. We don't have any take a break policy. That's one of the things we changed during COVID, so you can just apply year over year. We have single and multi-year grants. And I think that's pretty much it. If you need to do a final report with us, we offer the option to just have a conversation, and I'll write the report into our system for you. So as I said, we're just kind of trying to make it easy. I will say, having looked at the participant list and heard from all of you about your work, some of it sounds like a fit and some doesn't. So I appreciate the opportunity to learn about your work and for you to hear about the Miller Foundation, mainly because I understand that so many of you wear many hats, or you have friends that work in arts or K-12 education. I know that in small towns, a lot of people do a lot of jobs. So if you know of organizations that might be a fit, please have them reach out to me, call me, email me. We are sort of we don't do the partnerships maybe at the level that Brian does with Sherwood Trust, but we are very hands-on. There's only 2 of us that really talk to grantees. We're a team of 5. So we want to actually have the conversations. And even if you're not a fit, but you want some ideas or have some things to talk about with your community, I always welcome the opportunity to learn more from you. So thank you. I think
Thanks,
that's all I've got for now.
That sounds great. That was a very concise overview. And it was really interesting to hear how you guys have shifted your application and reporting procedures to be more accessible to people. I think that's wonderful. Thank you.
Well,
Okay.
It's been more fun for me, I'll say.
Yeah.
It's a lot more fun to have a conversation than read reports.
Amen to that. I agree. Okay, so last but not least, we have Levi from the Ford Family Foundation.
Hi, everyone. Great to be here. It's always one of my favorite things to get out in the community or be on calls like this and just hear about all the good things that's happening in, especially in rural communities. The Ford Family Foundation is really the philanthropic legacy of Kenneth and Hallie Ford, who started Roseburg Forest Products back in the 1930s, which grew into one of the largest privately owned timber companies in the world. And then they were always giving people by nature, gave through Roseburg Forest Products for years. But as Kenneth was kind of nearing the end of his life, Kenneth and Hallie established the foundation and really broke with the company and somewhat with the family. So despite the name Ford Family Foundation, we're actually a private foundation. And we do work across a multitude of sectors. We've got a scholarship, a really robust scholarship program throughout Oregon and Siskiyou County, California. Any given time, there's between 500 and 600 Ford scholars. And then we are just coming through a strategic plan. And so forgive me, I might be looking at my notes here a little bit, but trying to talk about our work in a little bit different ways these days. Our board has really kind of, through the strategic plan, we've really formed around 3 buckets of work, and that's family, education, and community. And under family, we're really interested in parent supports, family financial stability, and child abuse prevention. Under education, early childhood education is really important to the foundation. P3 alignment, that prenatal to 3rd grade alignment, helping kids be kindergarten ready, helping kids read at a 3rd grade level, those types of things. Pathways and supports, creating different pathways for kids to be able to navigate the K-12 system, but then also be able to navigate next steps into career or post-secondary education. And then obviously post-secondary completion is a big thing we do through our scholarships. And then in community, we do a lot of community building. Our rural community building department works in I think they're deeply working in something like 70 communities throughout rural Oregon and Siskiyou County, California. Community economic development. We have a department that's working to do just that, help communities move towards a community economic development model where there's more wealth that stays local, promoting entrepreneurs, that type of thing. And then we do a lot of work around organizational capacity building, and you'll hear that a little bit when I talk about our grants. Like I said, the Ford Family Foundation is an exclusively rural funder. We define rural as populations of 35,000 or less and not adjacent to a metro or urban area. That's most of Oregon and all of Siskiyou County, California. And we have a couple open grant opportunities. Really, our open grant opportunities fall into 2 buckets for us. One is our technical assistance. This is anything that helps organizations build capacity. These are smaller grants up to $5,000 to help you bring in a consultant to do strategic planning with your board or do some board development, or send staff to trainings, that type of thing. Think anything that leaves behind institutional capacity really is a good fit for our technical assistance grants. And then we have our Good Neighbor program. And our Good Neighbor program, currently it's kind of structured as small Good Neighbor and large Good Neighbor. We're going to be rolling out a new website here in the next month or month and a half or so. And things are going to be restructured a little bit. It's just going to be our Good Neighbor program. But currently it's our small and large Good Neighbor. Our small Good Neighbor is grants of $25,000 or less. These are really wide open grants that are really meant to meet communities where they're at, and where there's community need and community energy. There's no match for these grants, although the foundation won't be 100% of any project or program. They can be used for capital, for programmatic needs, general operating, so that really flexible dollars to meet communities where they're at. This actually is a result, one of the result of the pandemic and trying to be a better partner in rural communities, and an understanding that, you know, what communities need, what organizations need is access to funding that's a little easier to get, to be honest with you. Traditionally, the foundation hasn't supported things around like basic needs, food, housing, transportation, and was it exclusively funded almost exclusively youth programming. But with our new Small Good Neighbor, you know, that has opened up, and we now do support things around basic needs and age groups outside of that prenatal to 18 age range that we historically have done. We do provide a handful of grants that are larger than $25,000 a year. I think last year we did 15 that were larger than the 25,000. Anything larger than 25,000 looks more like our traditional granting. They really need to be aligned. The project or the program needs to be aligned with our funding priorities around family, education, or community. The bulk of those were capital last year. I think we only did 3 programmatic requests that were larger than 25,000 through our open grant program. And then there are some more guidelines and for these. You need to be to 50% of your budget committed before applying. You can only request up to 1/3 of your budget for the program or project. And then our board is looking for community support as demonstrated by local or regional dollars that go towards that program or project. And that's essential for our large grants. And so these would be those grassroots dollars that are going to different projects or programs. Think businesses, individuals, special events that you're putting on to raise money for that project or program. Really, the Ford Family Foundation is here to, like I said, meet communities where they're at. You can always reach out to me or my colleagues. We like to say that there's no wrong door at the foundation. We'd love to hear from you. I'd say, especially if you're thinking about one of the larger grants, I think it's really nice to be able to have a conversation and really talk about, you know, if the project or program is eligible for a large grant, and then what next steps might look like. Yeah, glad to be here. Excited to answer any questions you might have. And I'll turn it back over to you, Jennifer.
Thank you, Levi. I appreciate it. It's also interesting to hear about the new directions you're taking as a result of your strategic plan. A lot of foundations have been doing strategic planning either during or after the pandemic, and it's kind of interesting to see how foundations are changing in their approach and the types of things that they're giving to. So thank you for that. So while you guys are thinking about what your questions might be, I think I'll go ahead and get things started. All 3 of you said call anytime, which is so nice, and we appreciate that that you are making yourselves available and approachable for these folks that are wondering about how to get started with grant writing or how to approach you about a particular project or a program that they want to get funded. I'm wondering if you would like to comment on what you think makes the best use of your time when somebody calls. In other words, there's sort of this spectrum of how prepared they can be to talk to you. In other words, they probably shouldn't call you when they just have the seed of an idea in their head and no partners, right? And no budget. But by the same token, they don't need to necessarily have the grant fully formed before they call you either. So I'm wondering if you can sort of comment on if they are going to reach out to you to talk about a particular project or a program, what they should be prepared with that would make the best use of your time. And Brian, you want to go ahead and start?
I'll jump right in. Near and dear to my heart, this question. For Sherwood Trust, in where we are, I would suggest call anytime. I'm thinking about this. I have a fully formed plan. I said earlier that we were hands-on. I don't mean that in a controlling way. I mean, our philosophy, like most foundations, is support and don't influence. But we love conversations at any stage, because often what we find we can do is we can't always have money available in that way, but we can always have someone to meet who might be in that space. Other grantors that you may or may not have on your radar. And I'll speak for my coworker too, Julie and I think we take really seriously our role in supporting the nonprofit community. And I would want to define that as broadly as I possibly could for us.
Great. That's wonderful. Thank you, Brian. Levi or Jennifer, would you like to respond to that?
I guess I would just say, take a look at our website. It's not, we've made it really simple. It's just a handful of pages. We really tried to boil down the essence of what's a fit for us. I would say, if it's on the edge of something we may or may not fund based on what you read, happy to have the conversation, but really, again, just trying to preserve your time. If you're not a fit, our website will make it pretty straightforward. We also, on our grants portal, if you register on our grants portal, we have an eligibility quiz that just walks you through a series of questions and tells you, oh, you're a fit for this program, oh, you're a fit for that program, or you're not a fit. And if you're not a fit, you can still call. One of the things that we try to do is refer you to other foundations we know might support your work. I'm not always 100% up to date on what all the foundations are doing, but I do my best to stay abreast of it just so I can be a resource in addition to the funding.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Levi, did you have any comments from your perspective?
Yeah, I would say the Ford Family Foundation loves to hear about things fairly early on. I think it's helpful if you've got an idea of your budget and things like that. But I also like to let organizations know, we have this technical assistance bucket, and you may not be ready for one of our Good Neighbor grants, but you might be ready for a technical assistance grant that can help develop, a project or a program. So we've done, things like we'll have organizations that'll take advantage of that technical assistance, those dollars to hire a consultant to build out a fundraising strategy. And then, later on down the road, when that project is more ready for the Ford Family Foundation, then they can come in for a request. So I would just encourage folks to reach out and have a conversation. It really doesn't matter how early in the process you are. We love to have a conversation.
Great, thank you. Okay, looks like we have a question in the chat from Audrey. She's saying, are there any specific considerations or things you would see from an organization as just starting out? This has been a theme throughout these sessions. We have a couple organizations that are either new or shifting direction. And I know sometimes there is a hope that an organization is better established before they start apply for grant funding, but I'm wondering if you have any advice for the folks in the room whose organizations are newer, or they're just pivoting as a result of the pandemic. Jennifer, did you want to start?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I would say help us be able to tell the story of why you're making that pivot, what needs in the community you're responding to. I just think that's helpful for us to understand why. And if you're newer, it's sort of similar. What needs in the community are you trying to meet, and can you demonstrate support from the community for your work? And I know that doesn't always look like money. It can look like volunteers. It can look like business support, even if it's really modest or it's in kind. One of the things we allow you to use up to 25% of your budget can be in kind, meaning your volunteers' time, etc. And that's just one of our ways of trying to assess that. And if you're newer, like less than 3 years of providing services to your community, you can use a fiscal sponsor, and having a local organization that's willing to fiscally sponsor you is another way of demonstrating community support and investment in your work. So those are the things that come to mind.
Wonderful, thank you. Levi?
Yeah, I would echo the same thing. And I'd also just loop back around to those technical assistance grants as well. A great resource to help, walk your board through some development and thinking about next steps for the organization or for the project or whatever you're doing. The Ford Family Foundation really looks to those community partners as well, especially for our smaller grants. And so if you can demonstrate that you're integrated into the community in a way that makes sense for your organization. So, if you're a mentoring program that's working closely with kids, it'd be nice to see that you're working with the schools or other youth serving organizations to be able to identify who needs mentoring in the community, that type of thing. And then what's one thing that can be difficult for new organizations or new projects is our board does look to that sustainability piece, and knowing that the Ford Family Foundation is not a great year-over-year funder. And so just being able to talk to how you're going to keep this going is always really important. And I know that's difficult for new organizations, but to just be able to develop that kind of that muscle and how are you going to sustain this moving forward would be an important piece.
Yeah, that makes sense. Levi, there's a question for you directly in the chat, and then we'll let Brian comment on this question as well if he wishes. When the technical assistance grants that you're talking about, she's asking if Allison's asking if you would consider requests for more than one. I'm assuming she means more than one at a time.
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Allison. It just depends on the organization. We support organizations that are kind of umbrella organizations that are doing a lot of work in the community, different projects, that type of thing. So in that case, yes, if it's the same organization and it's kind of the same, it has a real, kind of the same flavor as another request, probably not. It'd just be worth a conversation to reach out. And it's also worth noting too, that our technical assistance dollars can run congruent with our Good Neighbor grants. So you can have an active Good Neighbor grant and then still apply for a technical assistance grant or vice versa.
Oh, that's good to know. Thanks. Brian, did you have any comments on the new organization or pivoting organization question?
Yeah, I would say, again, we like those calls early because we like to think that money clearly is important and it really matters, but sometimes it really also matters, like, here's how that works. Here's someone who knows how that is. It's really part of our ongoing programming in the community. In fact, we're running nonprofit fundamentals courses right now. What does finance look like? What does HR look like for that? But I would put that under two things. It really is about relationship building, and we know that these sometimes are long. And for Sherwood Trust, it's really part of our equity work and lowering barriers, because we have a reputation sometimes of being overly concerned with sustainable organizations, and that sometimes means we grant money to organizations who have money, and so we're really working on that. So I think it's a great point of pride for us here that we have begun to do more startup. You're going to hire an executive director for an organization. Yes, talk to us. We might want to fund that. So I think for us, that's really part of what we're trying to do, but our history has been a little bit more of a closed shop. And so that might just be our reacting to making sure that we're accessible in the community, and that we're supporting our nonprofits, whatever stage they're in, however we might be able to do it.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear about you talk about it from an equity point of view, because I'm assuming there's probably a lot of organizations that feel like foundations aren't accessible to them, and for you to sort of build that pathway and provide programs to help support them is wonderful.
We hear that. In fact, we often hear, like, I don't know if I should call you because we have a new executive director and I know you really like people who are in play. Like those, I love those calls because we can dispense a lot of myths right away. Yeah.
Great, thank you. So one thing we've talked about throughout these sessions is that when someone writes a proposal to your foundation to ask for funding, that you are, because of the grant deadlines you have and the way that your grants are structured, often dealing with a whole bunch of applications that you're reviewing at once, or a whole bunch of different proposals. As you're sifting through those groups of applications, what stands out to you, or what factors do you see that usually make a good proposal or a successful project? What are the factors that sort of stand out to you to say, in looking at this pile of applications, these are rising to the top because of either the way the project is structured or because of other factors that are in the application that lead you to believe, based on your experience and with this type of work, that they will be successful? And I haven't started with Levi yet, so I'm wondering if he would like to take this one first.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, couple things. I'd just say, the Ford Family Foundation, we have the luxury of having an open application that's open all year round. We don't batch anything. And so that's one of the ways that we try to meet communities where they're at, is just to be available when they're ready for a request. For us, it's really all about the community. For those smaller ones, we just try to see, we'd like to see the community in a request. You talk about the partners that you have, or the tables that you're sitting at, or those types of things. That's really what our review committee is looking for. For our larger requests, they're looking for the community as well, but really those donations that are going towards that project or program for those larger ones. But for us, it's really all about the community.
Yeah, community support for sure. Brian, do you want to address this?
I would say two things. We do grants in batches, and the trustees really want to believe that the universe is nothing bigger than the stack of applications in front of them, and that's how they want to make decisions. For that, I think the work that we've been doing here is really about clarity of grant writing, particularly for the class. I am a former journalist and editor, so I can go down a deep well of clarity of writing. But one thing we recently did on our application is rather than have like 5,000 words for what you're trying to do with a grant, we literally say in one sentence, what will this grant do? And that was really a response from having grants that we couldn't understand what they were asking for that. So for any of you grant writers that are working, if you happen to know a journalist or someone from that field, it's a really good skill set to have. So I would just say really clarity. And in terms of thematic, what we're always looking for is equity and belonging. And we ask that question in about 20 different ways as we go through grant proposals.
Thanks, Brian. Jennifer, did you want to talk about that from your perspective?
Yeah, I think I would just agree with Brian that clarity of your purpose. We have a really high approval rate in our fast track program. About 85% of the applicants are funded. In our two-step process, about half of our letters of inquiry are invited to submit full applications, and then it's about a 85% approval rate there. So if you fit us and we understand what you're doing, you're very likely to get a grant. That's kind of it. But we say similarly in our new kind of simplified applications, be brief, and hardly anyone takes us up on it. And it's for all of our sake, of course. But if you, and we don't need jargon, I will say not mostly, but often when we don't fund a grant, it's because our trustees are confused by the request. And obviously we make an effort to call and get questions answered, but yeah, clarity and simplicity of what you're setting out to do is great.
Great, thanks, Jennifer. I will pause for a moment and say I love it when our panelists reinforce what we've been teaching as part of the session. So yeah, we've been working on this thing called a summary statement, where can you describe your program in one sentence, and it is sort of a thought exercise, and I appreciate you reinforcing that, because I agree. Being able to be clear and succinct about what you want is so important. Brian has mentioned a couple times talking about equity and belonging, and we have talked during these sessions about the fact that we often see this as something that the foundation would like to discuss or like to hear about from a potential applicant. And I think sometimes we find in rural places that people are concerned about what a foundation might perceive about what their rural community is, or that they might be at a different stage in their journey towards educating themselves and improving in diversity, equity, and inclusion, as compared to maybe some of the larger urban organizations that you might see in applications. So I wonder if the panelists would like to comment on how your organization approaches working with nonprofits and municipalities and others on their approach to DEI, and what they can explain to you that will help elucidate where they are and where they're going. Does that make sense as a question?
Yep.
Okay, Brian, did you want to start?
Yeah, I would jump in. It's really super interesting in rural areas. So for us, we spend a lot of time, and we're super committed to DEI and equity. If you go through our grant guidelines, you will not see DEI mentioned. Because we have found in our area that when you start that, you lose a lot of conversations before you can really get to them. So we're really cognizant of who we're speaking to, and we really do have very clear ideas of what equity will look like. We also want to celebrate every bit of progress along the way, and that's different for different organizations. So we spend a fair amount of time talking about board composition. If you're serving poor people, do you have poor people on your board? If you're serving BIPOC communities, are they represented in your board and your staff? So these are relatively simple ways of looking at it, but it opens up lots of conversations in that. So we just want to make sure that what we're funding is really accessible. And for sure, we trust, parks, swimming pools, things like that. We love those projects because that includes everybody. But that's for us how we would look at that. Don't give up on the goal, but understand life in rural areas sometimes is different. What our urban counterparts will tell you should be saying.
Mm-hmm. Levi, did you have a comment from the perspective of the Ford Family Foundation on this question?
Yeah, I would just echo everything Brian said. The Ford Family Foundation, you kind of in a similar place. We have really heavily leaned into that DEI question, especially after 2020. And as we did that, we understood that there was something unique about rural, and we like to say that rural is its own inequity. They're just the resources there are not there as a lot of urban and metro areas have. Same thing, most of the organizations we work with are already trying to address these issues of inequity within their communities. That's why they exist. And so we just love to hear from organizations. People can demonstrate their diversity and their equity and their inclusion in different ways. It's not on our application. We don't ask that question, but but we understand that there are inequities in all communities. And so if you are addressing that anyway, we'd love to hear from you.
Great, thanks, Levi. Jennifer, what's your perspective?
Yeah, we started thinking about this really with COVID. The questions we'll ask in our application, I think, are my best way to explain our framework for it, which is we ask you who you serve. We provide a long list that you can click check boxes, and a lot of people check a lot of the boxes. It's based on the state's equity framework. The state defined a variety of communities as disproportionately impacted by COVID, and also wildfires. And really what that list ended up representing is communities that are under-resourced for in general, and always have been. So we ask the question, who do you serve? And we don't base a funding decision on it. It helps us understand your work. And then we ask, how are the people that you serve, or how are the populations you serve, represented in your leadership and your programs? So that's kind of the extent of it. And you don't have to serve everyone. You can serve an extremely narrow audience. But if you serve older adults, or if you serve rural communities, those are two of the checkboxes. How is the knowledge and wisdom from those communities involved in delivering your programs? So that's really it.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that perspective. So I wanted to, since now we're talking about rural, I feel like we should dig into that a little bit more. Brian and Levi, I know, work almost exclusively in rural, so they may have their own perspective. But Jennifer, I know you work on the full state, and so you have probably a different way of looking at this. But I'm wondering what you see out, and maybe I'll start with you, Jennifer, if that's okay, and then we'll see if Levi and Brian have other comments they want to make. When you think about philanthropic giving in rural places as opposed to the urban spaces that you work in, what are the differences that you see, or what different approaches does the foundation take, if any, in working with smaller communities as opposed to the bigger urban centers?
Well, we tend to sort of have a bonus mentality for organizations working in rural or remote communities, in the sense that we know that there are not as many funding opportunities. You literally don't have as big a donor pool as urban or more ex-urban locations do. So For example, our board often looks at, do they have a diversity of funding sources? How many donors do they have? How much corporate support do they have, et cetera? We know that those challenges are different in rural and remote communities. And so we don't look for that as much, I would say. We don't weight that as heavily. We look at in-kind, are people supporting the organization in other ways? So I guess that's the main way. I think I mentioned that before. That's how we look differently at organizations in rural and remote communities. We also, there's the stuff that's the solid fit for us. And I think probably every funder feels this way. There are things that are kind of just on the edge of what you might typically fund. Those edge grants for us are almost always in rural or remote communities, partly because we typically fund organizations that are in the arts. We typically fund arts-based organizations. Well, in rural communities, a community may not be able to support an entire arts organization. So the arts programming lives in a community center, lives in an organization that does health-focused work as well. So we tend to support organizations in rural communities that do a lot of things, and we only fund a part of what they do. One of the challenges I will say is that a lot of our giving is proportional to your budget, and this isn't a problem we've solved yet, I will say, but our grants are smaller to these organizations because the budgets are smaller, and that's something I think we're still wrestling with. We've really started focusing more and more on rural funding since the pandemic. It was a direction we were heading. We just hadn't done that much work in rural. It's part of the reason I was hired, was to get us outside of the Portland metro area a little more regularly, but it's still something we're wrestling with because we know that the need is greater. So got to work on that proportionality.
And one conversation we've had is a large donation or a large grant it can be a blessing and a curse to a small organization, because having to manage something that's almost as big as your current budget is a whole different kind of conversation. But so I understand that struggle, and that resonates. Brian or Levi, did you want to comment on this concept of rural giving and how it looks different in your experience?
I would say it's a really important discussion. We focus a lot more on rural lens, and frankly, that came from a reaction. This is not really for the necessarily nonprofit groups here, but informal philanthropy, it's very, very urban driven, and it's very academic driven. And we find ourselves as rural funders, I'm going to guess Jennifer and Levi are in the same position, of being in a different position. Again, the goals are the same, but the actions have to be different. And so we always appreciate when rural lens is part of the discussion, because I think it's a more honest discussion about where work really happens.
Yeah, I echo everything that Brian and Jennifer have said. As an exclusively rural funder, the foundation, the Ford Family Foundation, understands that a lot of times it's just a capacity issue for rural organizations. The executive director is also the grant writer, and then has to be out running programs in the afternoon. And so there's just, these organizations that can't do it all. And we've tried to take an approach to meet the organizations and communities where they're at. So, we really have a value of not declining applications until we've had further conversation. We try to get to yes whenever we can, to really meet communities where they're at. And then through this strategic plan that we're just starting to roll out, our board has really asked the question, how do we have this band of work that goes through all our work that we call Rural Champion, and how do we champion rural communities? And so we're starting to really think about how do we, help organizations access federal funds better or state funds better? How do we, what's our role to advocate for rural communities when things are going, when there's bills going through, the legislator, and how can we lift up rural in a way that's appropriate for the Ford Family Foundation to make it more equitable for rural communities, and that type of thing. So we've got, we're trying to, that technical assistance piece, going back to that, help build that capacity as well. So we're really thinking about this in very broad ways, and also trying to work with the individual organizations to get to a yes.
Great, thank you.
I'll add one more.
Go ahead, Jennifer, I'm
Oh,
sorry.
sorry, I just thought of one other thing, which is that the Miller Foundation has always been known for putting a huge emphasis on leadership. So looking at your board, looking at your staff leadership. And I think what we are learning from our rural grantees is that may look differently in smaller communities. So a small board or an all volunteer staff, I think our trustees and our Miller staff are just learning more about how that sometimes needs to work in rural communities. So that's just one other thing.
That sounds great. Looks like there is a question in the chat from Beth, but I think that it may have already been addressed. Beth, do you feel like your question about the budget threshold has been covered, or do you want to ask it? Go ahead and take yourself off mute if you need to.
I'm off mute because I was typing an email to Levi in the side.
Uh-oh.
Jennifer, I may have missed it, but we have a lot of scrappy arts organizations, and that's not why I'm here, but I know we have a lot of scrappy arts organizations in our community who find ways to do their arts projects without a budget of $25,000. And because they've had to be that so that they can actually provide something in our community. Are you suggesting that maybe they go to our government agencies that are like our recreation programs and that sort of thing, and maybe partner with them as a fiscal partner, even though they're their own nonprofit, but because they don't have that level of budget, they wouldn't be looked at? Or should they call you for some conversation around how to maybe address that, of what a budget would look like if they could actually, be paying a part-time staff or something like that?
I would say in that instance, definitely call me. Just so I can, it's easier to answer specifics than sort of generalities. Absolutely encourage them to give me a call. Yeah, I think that's probably the easiest way to go. Also, I assume they're getting funding maybe from the county cultural coalitions or other, maybe not. Anyway.
Yes, but small, I would say small amounts.
Okay. Yeah, give them my email or phone number.
Great. Okay, I'm opening it up now if anybody else wants to take themselves off mute and ask a question. Okay. Well,
I don't see anybody asking something.
nope, I don't think so.
I'm always known to talk too much in this class.
No, that's fine.
I was going to email Levi separately, but I think this might be relevant if I make it a general question. And I think that all of your organizations might have an answer. We have a current Ford Family Foundation grant. We are looking at aggressively seeking some funding for expansion and capital and that sort of thing. Could each of you maybe address how you go, like, what's the threshold of where we can ask to start talking about next projects or concurrent projects and that sort of thing? Or projects that are outside of separate like buckets of money, so to speak, like maybe one's program and one's capital?
I would jump in, Beth. I don't think that we look at grant amounts related to a budget in a specific way. We do in a general way for that. But for us, really, our competitive grant programs, really the first question that the trustees want to know is, what is the organization's highest priority? And it really focuses our discussion there. That's really mostly an outcome because our competitive grants, if we're going to grant $1 million a cycle, we have $4 million of requests. So it's really just more the reality of the market for that. But for us, we really want to know what your highest priority is. And if someone says, well, we have 3 things we're working on, we will work with them. No, seriously, what is the single most important thing you're trying to do right now? That's the lane we want to be in.
That's a good clarity thing too. What do you need? What is your top priority?
Right.
And Beth, I know you have a fairly decent sized grant with the foundation now. Typically, there is a waiting period after the foundation's large grants. Goes back to a little bit what Brian was talking about, is we receive more requests than we have resources to respond to. But again, it's always worth a conversation, because we still might be able to be able to support in small ways, whether that be technical assistance to help develop a fundraising strategy for this capital project. And so it's always worth that conversation. And we can just figure out the best ways the Ford Family Foundation can support whatever that next step might be. The Amari Center is really aligns well with the Ford Family Foundation's funding priorities. So, I think we just want to have a further conversation.
I would just jump in and say you can only have one grant at a time from the Miller Foundation. We have such limited programs, just having two, but you can always talk to us at any time about your next grant or what to be thinking about. Typically, we say do it, 3 to 6 months before your grant ends, because we'll know if we're tweaking anything for the following year, which we typically don't. We're pretty steady in what our priorities are and our processes. But you can be a fiscal sponsor for another project while you have a grant from us. So that's it.
Oh, that's a good clarifying comment. Yeah, it's good. Any other questions?
Hey, I'm Doogie. I'd like to ask a question kind of on behalf of veterans. And we're spread out everywhere, but like I said, and so some of my ideas are nationwide, but a lot of us got hit during the pandemic of being separated from our connections of because like I said, we're a tight knit community, but again, there's a lot of mental health issues, and of course we're dealing with 22 suicides a day between military members. I don't know how to frame this, but like I said, I know this is an Oregon thing, and I'm deeply rooted in Oregon, and I'm a Ford Family graduate. They're Levi from a lot of years ago. But like I said, how would your organizations look at groups to serve military families, veterans in your organization?
So I think the question would be, are veterans included in your giving priorities? Are they specifically called out, or are they implied? Maybe Levi, you want to start with that since.
Yeah, we do support veterans and veterans organization, and along with just that idea that we have that broad support for rural communities, and veterans are a critical part of that. And so I would not hesitate to reach out to the Ford Family Foundation, and we could have a conversation about what you're trying to do and explore next steps. I'd be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you.
And Jennifer, Brian, do you have any specific comments on the veteran population relative to your giving?
We don't have specific programs that are a fit because we provide general operating support for arts and K-12 organizations. I know that some of the organizations we fund do specific outreach to veterans' families, students whose parents are veterans. We fund arts organizations that have specific arts programming for veterans, but nothing specific for veterans organizations.
Sure. Brian?
I think we are a little bit more like Miller, so we're place-based. So I'm trying to think if we've had anything veteran specific. We would look at the veteran community like we would look at any other community that we serve. We also have the VA center here, so I don't know if that makes it, if that's part of why we don't get a lot of requests sort of veteran specific for that. But yeah, great question, Christopher. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, well, I certainly appreciate the good questions everybody's been bringing into the conversation and our panelists' thoughtful answers. I want to thank them for their time. I appreciate you spending some time with our group today and helping us all learn more about the process of philanthropy and how nonprofits can engage with you and other types of organizations. So the panelists are welcome to stay if they wish. We're going to move on with this group to some wrap-up activities. So if you want to stay and listen in, you're welcome to. Otherwise, we understand if you are busy with other things and need to get on with your day. So thank you so much. It's been tremendous.
Thank you, everyone. I do have to step away.
Bye, Jennifer.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, I do too. Keep doing what you're doing and let us know. Hold us to account.
Great.
All right. Yeah. Bye, everyone. Don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Thank you, Levi. Okay, so thanks for that, participating in that. We had a request to talk about sponsorships as a way of raising money for your organization. So I was going to go ahead and shift to that really quick and cover that topic, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up, see if anybody has any final comments or questions about the class, and then we'll send you on your way. So as you all know, if you've worked in the nonprofit sphere, what a sponsorship is essentially, it's a different type of funding that you can come into your organization. So we have grants, we have donations, we have special events, and we have sponsorships. Sponsorships are often tied to events, as I'm sure you know. This is an opportunity for you to go out and have people in the business community or corporations that have a presence in your community help financially support what you're trying to do. We mentioned corporate foundations in an earlier session and talked about how corporations will often have a foundation that gives grant money to put specific giving priorities, but they'll also have likely sponsorship opportunities that are a little bit more about, you know, putting their name on things, usually smaller dollars than a grant. As we talked about with corporate foundations, the companies or the small businesses that you're working with want to give back to the local community if they feel like that's the right thing to do in terms of being involved in your community, but there are also benefits to them too in terms of tax benefits, in terms of their opportunity to get their name and their logo associated with the work that you're doing as sort of a marketing bonus as well. A couple of tips on soliciting sponsorships, and then we'll talk about an approach that you could take if you wanted to get more organized around this type of giving. As we talked about with banking and other small businesses, usually what will happen is they will have a budget for giving for the year. So they'll have a budget for sponsorships or a budget for donations that they want to do to your annual auction or things like that. So it's important for you to find out when their fiscal year is, whether it's a calendar year or some other kind of calendar arrangement, to find out when they set that budget, because you'll want to have a conversation with them before they set their budget, and then you'll want to have a conversation with them as soon as you can after the budgets have been finalized, so that you can say, do you remember we had this talk and we'd like you to be involved in X? Were you able to budget something for us? Can we have a conversation? Because there's this same situation where at some point the money's going to run out during their budget year, and you want to get it as early as possible in their budget year so that you have the highest chance of getting funding from them. So those are sort of the general comments I have about sponsorships. And then this is a slide that's going to be hard to read, so I apologize, but Freya is going to kindly also put some other examples of this in the chat. So what typically works best is to create some kind of a menu for a company to choose from. And this helps you in terms of your workload as well, because then you're basically approaching these businesses once a year for funding, as opposed to every time you have an event, you have to go, oh my gosh, I have to get sponsors for this event. And it becomes, you know, sort of this cycle that you have to go through many times during the year. If you can create a list of, you can do it two different ways. So in this particular case, you see on the screen, they have defined different levels of giving. There's an individual level, and then there's a visionary partner level. So it starts at $250 and goes up to $10,000. So you can take this approach. And with that, you explain all the benefits that come relative to their marketing that they're interested in. to try to at that particular level of giving. So for example, on this, you see the blue sustaining partner at $1,000 gets their logo on Main Street. This is a Main Street that's doing this on the Oxford Main Street sponsor sign. You get your company name on a logo with on all the event pages on the website, on all the kiosk posters, on all the marketing literature. And then going down the line, you can see what what benefits they will get at each level. If you want to get even more granular about this, what some more sophisticated or small businesses or corporations might ask you is, can you tell me based on your previous experience, how many eyeballs will see this? In other words, how many flyers are you going to distribute? How many people visit your web page? How many people see your social media posts? And so you can actually connect their logo or their mentions to actual eyeballs if you want to get more sophisticated about it. The other thing I would say is you can create this menu of opportunities and you can also customize it. In other words, somebody's like, well, I want to be a sustaining partner at $1,000, but I also would like this extra business listing on the website year-round thing, but I can't afford $5,000. You can negotiate within these levels if you wish, but usually it's a good idea to have that flexibility. The other approach I would say when you look at this particular example is instead of doing levels like this, you could even do it by event. So if you're a downtown association like this Oxford Main Street and you had a festival in the spring, if you have a small shop Saturday for the holidays, if you have like if you sponsor some, or if you organize some kind of Halloween trick or treat that increases the traffic in downtown, and they want to be involved in that, you could also do it by event. It just sort of depends on what makes the most sense for your organization. So what I would say additionally is you're going to create this menu and you're going to say, I'd like to talk to your business about how you can partner with us during the year on, promoting what we're trying to do, and also getting your name out there and your logo, and making sure that people know that you're affiliated with our organization. So you're having a relationship building meeting, and they may agree to commit to a certain level and they may not. So if they do commit during the year, make sure that you're communicating with them. And I know we talked about this with grants too. It's like the same philosophy where you're communicating during the year exactly what has happened with the money that they gave. And that way, when you go and see them, in 12 months time, you have a little bit more of a relationship built. They're familiar with you. They know you've been communicating with them about, yes, thank you for being a sponsor for our Halloween trick or treat in downtown Oxford. We had, over 3,000 families come through. Your event was, we put up 500 flyers and your logo was on all of them. Communicating that after the fact is also a really helpful thing to do. So I'll stop here and see if anybody has any questions or if they have their own experiences with sponsorships that they would like to share. Oh, Freya says that the links I gave her to share in the chat aren't active, so we'll have to find some. Sorry about that. So, and does that, I guess I would ask, does that answer the questions that people had about sponsorships? And do you have any additional?
We have a lot of in-kind donations. A pancake breakfast, and we have a store that gives us all the food for the pancake breakfast, so we don't have an expense. And we always post a sign at the breakfast saying, sponsored by so-and-so. Are those kind of donations, do we include those when we write a grant?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, I think as you heard from the funders today, community support, demonstrated community support is really important. So if you can say, like if they ask you about your organization, to describe your organization, you can say, we're a senior center that serves X, Y, and Z. We have many partners in the community that help support our services. You could list them if you have room. You could say we have 50. We could, I'm exaggerating, but you know what I mean? You can, Yes, the answer is yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Demonstrating community support it's like gold when you're asking for money. Let me answer this question in the chat and I'll get to you next, Rachel. How do you vet sponsors? I think we had this conversation a little bit around grants, corporate grants as well, which is you want to know if an organization or a small business or a corporation that is working with you has some alignment with your mission. In other words, you don't want them to be at cross purposes. If you run a anti-smoking program, probably it's not a good idea to have Philip Morris as a sponsor, just as an obvious example. Other things are probably not that clear, but in terms of how I've been in situations also where we had in our community a very controversial project that happened to be driven by a corporation that had a lot of money to throw around. And that was a really hard situation sometimes because they would want to sponsor an event that we were having. And we would have to say, okay, yes, it's nice to have their money as part of our, as part of supporting our event, but will the people attending the event be turned off by the fact that this is a controversial project? And it's not an easy conversation to have. And I can't say that there's like a super clear black and white answer, but I agree that it is important to have a conversation about, is this funder appropriate for our organization and fit with our mission? So Rachel, what was your question or comment?
Oh, I was wondering the best way to actually approach sponsors. Should we call and try to set up an in-person meeting or start with a letter and follow up? I was just wondering if you have suggestions on what's most effective.
Yeah, I think that it depends on the community and it depends on the relationship. So if it was me and I was in a small community, I would want to have a conversation with a business where I perhaps introduce them to our organization on sort of an on-ramp where I, here's a newsletter. We just wanted you to know what it was we were doing. We're not necessarily asking for money on the first visit. Another thing that's really interesting if they're up for it is if you have a facility they can take a tour of. That might be something cool. I know, you're a local business in the community. We'd like you to see what we're doing. Would you be interested in coming by for a tour? Once you feel like you have determined their interest in your program, you can also ask a question like, do you do sponsorships? And just ask that basic question. And then another easy question to ask so that it doesn't feel like you're asking for money, because that's always, a hard thing, especially if you don't have a lot of practice doing it. So you say, do you have a sponsorship program? Then you can say something like, can you tell me about the process if I wanted to request a sponsorship? And so that way they don't have to say yes or no, they can just tell you how. And if there's a process in place, then you can, and if they basically just say, come by and let's talk, then you have an opening to have a meeting. Or why don't you send me an email with the kinds of things that you're looking for? And then if you have this nice package menu ready to send, then that makes your life a lot easier, because then you can just say, here's what we normally offer. We can be flexible within these parameters. Please let me know. I find in rural that this ends up being a lot more about one-on-one conversations, whether that be via phone or in person. I think that if you're talking above a certain dollar amount, I would show up in person. I wouldn't do it over the phone, because it's going to be, as Allison's mentioning in the chat, these giving amounts might not be realistic for your community and the small business community that you have. You might have to have a menu that's 50% lower than this. And I agree with that. And you have to just know based on your community what's going to fly. But if you're doing a big donation for your community, I think it's definitely a developed relationship and an in-person meeting. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's very helpful. Thank you.
Okay, good. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, you'll have this slide in the chat and we'll see if we can find some more examples for you to send in the post link. We have reached the end of our time together, sadly. It has been wonderful to get to know all of you. And I would love to, as we wrap up, stay on the call if anyone has any final questions or comments that they want to talk about. I'm going to make my final plea and pitch to fill out the assessment survey that Freya has threw in the chat at the beginning, and I think she's going to put it in the chat again. This is what helps us continue to get funding for this program. The comments that you make, we are able to share with our funders. Also, the feedback that you have helps us improve the program and make it better for the next group that comes through. So I really, really super duper encourage you to fill out the assessment. I can't say it any other way. Okay, so I'm gonna take my screen down, and if you have to run away, I certainly understand. But if you want to stay and make any, have any other last questions or make further comments, let me know. I will also say I'm always here for you. So I get emails or calls from people who have taken this class, 3 years ago and say, what do you think about this? And I love hearing from you and I love answering those questions. I also love it when you tell us that you got the grant. That is so much fun for us because we share in your excitement. So if you want to send me a note and says, oh my gosh, we got the grant, I will be one of the more excited people to hear about that if you wanted to share.
Can you put back up that website for your survey? I didn't get it all written down.
I will, yes, we can do that, but also I will put it in the email after the session so that you have it again if it's easier for you to click on it that way.
That'll be perfect.
All right. Anything else? Any funny stories? Oh, Rachel.
Well, this was really helpful for me, especially for the grant writing aspect. It reminds me how, even though we've been around as an organization for 40 years, I feel like overall, we need more training and education. So can you recommend some organizations that really caught my attention when the Sherwood Foundation said, oh, we have nonprofit basics and we cover HR and these other topics. So I'll meet with our local RAIN Catalyst because I know they do businesses, but we should be operating as a business just because we're a nonprofit. That doesn't mean, we need to be, it's not an excuse to be irresponsible in our way of running our organization. So I'll meet with RAIN, but I was just wondering if you had any other suggestions.
Yeah, I would highly recommend Nonprofit Association of Oregon. And I know it's been mentioned in a previous session. I think that we did talk about that. They have a membership model. So, you can join and become a member and then you get discounts on their trainings. Or if you don't want to do that, if you don't think you'll utilize them that much, you can also join their trainings at a little bit higher fee. But they also send out a weekly newsletter that has really good information plus updates on training. And if you're looking for things like board development training, financial management, they have a grant writing class too. They recently did a federal grant writing class, which I think is definitely needed in the current climate. So, and if you're on the call and you're in Washington, there's the Washington Association of Nonprofits, and there is 5013 Commons. They actually have 2 organizations in their state. But so if you're a nonprofit, affiliating yourself with the nonprofit association in your state is a really good idea in terms of getting training opportunities and learning about things that other nonprofits are doing. The other thing I would tell you, if you're from a municipality or another type of agency, there's probably an association for that, like League of Oregon Cities, Association of Washington Cities. There's a special districts association. If there's a school boards association there. So I guess what I'm saying is those are usually the entities that will organize training opportunities because there's an economy of scale there where they can bring in and provide the opportunities. And so you don't have to do that by yourself. And Rachel, if you do, I know that you heard about this a lot from Levi, but if you do find that you have really specific training needs for your organization, using their technical assistance grant program is it's a pretty accessible grant program. So, and then you could bring in a trainer just for you guys. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Well, I've got to say about halfway through our classes, I had pretty well decided that this was way over my head and that there was no way that I was going to be able to accomplish that. And then after the last session and I had a chat with Libby, I came away saying, okay, I think I can do this. So it between there's no way and I think I can is big lip. So I really appreciate all the classes.
Oh, that's great. And I'm really glad you got connected with Libby. Kelly Nonprofit Consulting has been a tremendous support to a lot of people who have gone through this class. And it's great. I mean, I can sit here and talk at you all day, but having one-on-one time to sort of specifically explain your situation to somebody is a really nice benefit of this class.
Yeah.
Thanks, Connie. That means a lot. Anybody else? Okay, if not, we can wrap it up, and I hope you guys stay in touch. Thank you. Bye.